Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're watching this. I want to cordially welcome you to our video podcast or our vodcast here featuring Snowflake. My name is Chris Ellis. I'm the Global Head of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at FactSet. I'm the executive sponsor of FactSet's relationship with Snowflake, but certainly there's an entire team of us who work with Snowflake every day and support this amazing partnership that we have. We are really excited today to join you and talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing with Snowflake and where we see the puck going. And I'm joined today by Chris Napoli from Snowflake. And Chris, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, pleasure. And thank you, Chris, for inviting me to your inaugural vodcast. Maybe a tale of two Chris's would be a nice way to kick this episode off. But joking aside, I'm Christopher Napoli. I lead wealth and asset management strategy at Snowflake. What does that mean? Part of my responsibility is to build and develop how organizations on the buy side of finance leverage Snowflake in all of its capabilities, of which we'll go through over the course of this podcast. But it's been a fantastic partnership, as you had mentioned. It's fortunate that we can continue to build on this relationship and truly develop solutions for the buy side of finance.
Chris, because we're doing this under the FactSet umbrella and FactSet brand, it's possible that there's some folks on the call today who are unfamiliar with Snowflake. Yeah. Can you kind of give us a 10,000-foot overview of who Snowflake is and what Snowflake does? Not sure how many meters that is for those of you outside the United States, but
yes,
please.
For sure. So Snowflake is software that actually operates on cloud infrastructure, or what we refer to as the hyperscalers. I think in broad general ways, that's AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, as well overseas as Ali Cloud. We don't operate on that one, but theoretically, if you're an APJ, you may be familiar with that term. So ultimately, what Snowflake is software that helps orchestrate the underlying cloud infrastructure that really allows organizations to take advantage of what it is to lever theoretically leased data centers, right? Instead of keeping everything in on-prem, or the ability to kind of lever software and hardware in order to do next level and more interesting analytics and computational abilities. So while that may be a little bit in the weeds, think of it more as a way to truly power and take advantage of the capabilities of the cloud. And we could get into that into more detail as we go through this podcast.
Great. Chris, a little bit for those in the audience who may be familiar with Snowflake or less familiar with Snowflake, can you just talk a little bit about the differences or similarities between a Snowflake versus an AWS versus an Azure versus a Databricks, just to kind of give them sort of a lay of the land?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning earlier, when you think about cloud infrastructure, you tend to pick one of these organizations. What Snowflake really is software that interoperates across all those cloud providers. So meaning it normalizes whether you are on AWS and you want to reach or communicate or deliver content or receive information from someone using Microsoft Azure. We basically connect, or the connective tissue in the cloud, to try to create what we actually go to market as, which is the AI data cloud. So part of what that means is that we are looking to create an interoperable, secure, and governed way for each of our industries or sub-industries to share information and intelligence in order to actually drive business outcomes with the power of the cloud, without thinking or worrying about how hard it is to like spin up clusters and things like that for certain computational workloads.
Great. Fantastic. Let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about the cloud and Snowflake at a high level, sort of focusing in on the value prop. When clients ask me about where we're going with Snowflake or why someone would be interested in the cloud, we always start talking about the elasticity of storage and compute, the ability for you to get access to the technology, the data warehousing capabilities, the compute power, without automatically having to buy servers, having to buy hardware, without a big upfront commitment to that. And for most of our clients, that means a hybrid solution, right? Between what they're doing on-prem with traditional data warehousing technology versus what they're doing with the cloud, and trying to be very strategic and have a real macro strategy. Chris, how do you see that question of sort of what is the cloud's value prop compared to the more traditional, older way of doing things?
Yeah, and funny, at this point, you think it's been going on forever, but really the cloud is roughly 15 or so years. in terms of its genesis, and it spun out of needing more servers in order for Amazon to keep up Prime Day. Right? And they're like, what do we do with all this infrastructure when not everyone is on our website? And lo and behold, they start leasing it out and creating software around it. But what does that really mean, right? If you were just to think in the financial services industry, particularly something I know that FactSet near and dear, right? For quantitative research, if you were pre-existingly a hedge fund, a buy-side shop, a sell-side research department, you need a large amount of data, and you are looking to run processing on it, reporting on it, et cetera, et cetera. But there's limitations of how much data you can store, right? People forget this is in hard drives or how the old world used to be. And now with the power of the cloud, you basically have unlimited storage, and theoretically in that same server farm, you'd have a certain amount of CPUs. Well, now you have unlimited amount of CPUs. So what does that mean? Batch reports that used to take 2 days, or things that used to take a day to compute or research or wait to have data staged in some area in order to do a process. Well, that all of a sudden, things that used to take days start taking minutes. And that drastically changes the value proposition of leveraging something like a Snowflake and the cloud, to where if we're in the business of doing investment research, I could get to the answer a day before you if we put the same information and the same data into different systems. Well, then I theoretically have an advantage, right? And that's kind of the way that you look at the value proposition of leveraging the power of the cloud. That is just in general, it's allowed faster innovation and research to kind of occur in our markets.
I mean, I think of what you said as really like the two words that pop into my mind are agility and dexterity. Is that a good way to think about it?
It is. It also winds up being, you start thinking out of the box, like, hey, what else can we do, right? And think about, say, that same quantitative research process. What happens if you want to say, okay, let's bring in all the pre-existing ESG data, right? So see if there's any alpha, any correlations to anything along those lines. It used to take 3 to 6 months perhaps to data engineer a pipeline into a pre-existing process. And now with the power of the cloud, particularly via Snowflake and through our partnerships, you could just light up your ESG data as a view, right? Assume once it's procured and just join it and run correlation and run analysis right inside of the secure governed data cloud of Snowflake. So to your point, agility, dexterity, and then the art of the possible really starts being like in the key differentiators that you see.
Yeah. So I think I want to speak to one of the misnomers, or one of the, I think, misunderstandings as I talk to clients out there. As Chris, as you mentioned, Snowflake, the cloud, is not a new company, is not a new concept. It's been out there for a little while. Mm-hmm. But the evolution towards using the cloud for data warehousing and compute and storage needs is still evolving, is still in the early stages. Sort of the big number that I think about from FactSet is there are about 2,000 clients who are taking data from FactSet in various forms of data in various feeds. About 300 of those are taking it via the cloud. So it's really only 15% of the clients that are taking data from FactSet are taking it via the cloud. That number is growing on both an absolute and a percentage basis, obviously faster, but it sort of speaks to the fact that we're still earlier in the game. We're still earlier in the innings on that. So if you're not doing that today, you haven't missed the boat. You're not late to the game. It's just part of, I think, where we are in the natural evolution of change. Chris, do you have any sort of thoughts on that from the Snowflake seat instead of the FactSet seat?
Yeah, you're spot on, right? And I think it's moved. It's what I like to reference as having the curse of knowledge of working at Snowflake, because you see the tip of the spear of all innovation, right? Bringing in generative AI to build certain types of models or certain use cases that are rather prevalent in financial services. And you take for granted sometimes, like you said, that maybe 15% of the data of the world at best is in the cloud, right? And so it's different from the maturity of our clients. So basically you're not missing out yet. But in truth, what you get to do is to learn from the maturation of actually the software and how cloud infrastructure truly helps businesses. It used to just be BCP as a backup, right? That's kind of how the cloud initially came. It's like, hey, let's make sure you have a backup. And now people are saying, oh, this is how we're going to differentiate and compete, and we're going to invest in a cloud first strategy. But it's fantastic to see that maturation over time. But you now can accelerate rather quickly to get right to the business value.
Awesome. Chris, let's peel this back a layer and let's go a little bit deeper here. I want to sort of run through some of the firm types a little bit and get your thought on what's happening at the tip of the spear. What are those core needs that they need? So let's start out. Let's talking about investment managers, and maybe if you want to talk about investment managers and hedge funds in there. What are the key drivers that are pushing? What are the key problems that investment managers and hedge funds are trying to solve where cloud is a fantastic fit?
Yeah. It winds up being a rather interesting use case because if I take a look at, or the way I frame asset management is I bifurcate it out, which means kind of just split in two. Sorry, I'm a recovering consultant. And it's like, and you look at it as the manufacturing of products, right? And that goes into a large majority of, portfolio management, equity research, so on and so forth. And then, but the other being distribution, right? And where I've noticed the power of not only the cloud, but also what you think about is lakehouse kind of infrastructure, meaning unstructured data along with semi-structured and structured in the same platform, right? That Snowflake is able to support. And lo and behold, it's thinking about how do we do propensity scoring for wealth management, for to attracting of assets, or how do we accelerate the RFP or the RFI process? How do we empower our sales people to be able to lever cloud plus AI actually to that point in order to just bring in more assets for the firm? And how do we make sure we think about where our distribution channels are? How do we score, our wholesalers, our retailers, whatever it may be? And that really winds up being where a lot of interesting things are occurring. And it's changing as the world changes, particularly for asset management, about what is the right way to attract assets into the firm, and then how do we service that? And then what mostly I've seen as a result of that is kind of moving into wealth management as the next phase of services once you do have those asset management clients. So it's been rather interesting to think about how cloud has been able to really focus on the customer and the life cycle and how you kind of service them throughout the course of their lifetime. Yep.
You anticipated my next question, where you were going to go in wealth. Can you do that similar sort of deep dive or peel the layer back on the sell side, on the banking side of the house, and how they're particularly trying to solve problems with Snowflake in the cloud?
Yeah, and as mentioned, the sales and distribution use case even there, particularly since banks have so many more services, winds up also being relatively prominent all across the landscape of what I'm going to say is capital markets in the investment banking kind of space. Similar, so there's organizations that have retail discount brokerage, and they look to service them all throughout the firm, bring them all the way to, say, asset management, to private banking, all the way through to the life cycle. So that seems to be the natural progression that we're seeing, and exactly how do organizations wind up leveraging Snowflake in that capacity. It's the security and governance of Snowflake is really what has allowed it to have such a predominant marketplace in wealth and asset management and financial services in particular. So some of how you move an individual, say like myself, if I'm at, say, JP Morgan, you need to be able to service me and do analytics across my PII, right? And without any risk of that ever going out, or sensitive data. So the storage of Snowflake for cloud storage is so secure that more organizations in the sell side are realizing this is where you can go to actually run that level of analytics and to service out the individual all throughout the life cycle. So that kind of genome or customer 360 view of the client winds up being rather prominent. The other areas that we're seeing organizations start to use Snowflake with its newer capabilities is particularly for loan origination, document processing, private assets, private markets, as organizations really move into that. Sell-side organizations, as much as the buy-side now are realizing private credit seems to be the area of investment. With that comes a lot of unstructured data, a lot of PDFs, right? The same way through the loan and origination process. So those tend to be the larger areas that we are seeing organizations move into.
Great. Let's take this analysis, let's rotate it 90 degrees, and instead of talking as much about the firm types, let's talk a little bit more about the data types and the data sets. We've been incredibly happy and incredibly bullish on our partnership with Snowflake. The current number stands at 76 different FactSet data sets integrated into the Snowflake marketplace today. I'm sure there'll be, we'll get over 80 soon, and over 100. Eventually, we'll probably grab a beer when we get over 100.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So talk a little bit, Chris, about when you think about sort of the more standard feeds, whether that's fundamentals, estimates, ownership, sort of your core building block data sets. Why does it make sense, or what's the value of integrating those into your cloud environment, using those via Snowflake?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, and I definitely look forward to having at least a water when we hit 100. But joking aside, the way that the value proposition, particularly for Snowflake in the cloud, particularly for as you mentioned, the core fundamentals and foundational data sets that build asset management, is that previously you took a lot of that by SFTP. You'd have to go through data engineering pipelines, and the change. And once you did receive that information, and there used to be Python loaders that would do this when I was working with in-market data, all of a sudden you'd have a change, or you'd have to restate something, and that process would be really, really challenging. But when you wind up moving your data sets up into the cloud, particularly distributed via Snowflake, what's really happening is that you're viewing, you view the table in its structure. So you don't have to do all the legacy ETL. What you say in the cloud is extract, load and transform. You wind up doing it that you're just viewing the other organization's table. So any changes that FactSet is making to that data set, you are viewing or can create automated processes that can update and kind of move forward. That is truly like how the cloud is transforming the industry, to say we can have much faster time to decision if we lever it in this capacity, and we could have less operational, less challenges in the reconciliation process if we're leveraging the cloud and we're all looking at the same data at the same time. And that's truly been transformational. It's helped custody banks and accounting platforms in particular, that one use case, and what the cloud has permitted us to do. So thank you for very much moving your data sets there. You're part of creating the operational alpha that we like to say, or even I like to call, the data liquidity that can happen in the cloud.
Right. So let's move beyond some of the standard data feeds, and let's talk a little bit about some of the more specialized data sets that I think we both think are particularly valuable when accessed via the cloud. And in my mind, the poster child for that is tick data. So when I think about tick data, first of all, it is voluminous. If you say anything about tick data, it is voluminous. And you talked, Chris, at the beginning about agility, dexterity, the flexibility of this. And one of the key things around this is, if you think about with that tick data set living in Snowflake every day, and the ability for someone very quickly to decide, I want to dig into this, I want to explore research use cases that may be a little bit edgy, right? That may not be completely mainstream. I want to try to differentiate. I've got some new ideas that I really want to test, and I don't want to have a 3-month, 6-month lead time for that. The work that we've done together with your team around making tick data part of Snowflake really empowers that for our clients on the investment management and hedge fund side. Speak to that from your seat.
So part of, as I just mentioned, thinking about data liquidity and how do you almost create a single source of truth across an enterprise, right? Tick data happened to be one of those areas that I always found interesting, because it's mostly used in the front office for analytics and research and fundamentals analysis, but it is also required in the middle and the back office and risk management, reporting as well. TCA, so on and so forth. So is there a way to lever the power of the cloud to go after this behemoth of data, right? I think
well said.
Well, I think some organizations are 20 PBs of tick history that they're processing and doing back testing on, and you're just like, the value proposition of bringing that into the cloud storage and wind up having everyone analyze it is just too large of an opportunity to pass up. I see exactly the same opportunity that you see. If you're storing it once at FactSet, now everyone doesn't have to store it everywhere, right? So you're creating almost a utility for the market to not have to go through and put those same 20 PBs and all the different organizations that may or may not require them. That to me is a rather interesting an opportunity and a way to transform ultimately how front office analytics can be done, right? In particular, research, back testing, so on and so forth. So we thank you very much for your partnership in that initiative. And it's rather interesting because I think the industry is starting to realize that as well. Like, hey, is there a better way to really take a look at this and get information faster into the fingertips of the people?
And as the listener to this vodcast or the watcher of this vodcast, I would sort of challenge you to, as you think about the new types of data, the new types of information you want to explore, that you want to look at in your process, ask yourself and ask your team, why do we have to do this the old way? Is there a better way for us to do this going forward? Gives us more agility, gives us more dexterity, lets us get to better outcomes. If there is, at least explore it, right? And I think we would encourage you to look at that. Another data set that is in a similar vein to this is that I want to highlight is private company data. So we think about the core private company universe as about 15 million companies. When we look at FactSet's data strategy overall, one of the areas that we've been particularly laser focused on is dramatically improving the coverage, the quality, the depth, the intelligence of our private company data set. It's all about reducing the information chasm between public companies and private companies. Are you ever going to fully close that gap? No, you're not. But how do you minimize that gap? And then bringing that into the process or the workflows for the investment manager, the sell side, or even the wealth management, where again, privates are becoming a bigger and bigger piece of what the wealth firms are doing with their high net worth, ultra high net worth investors. That's another data set that's worth a closer look via the cloud. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and particularly the move to the private markets in general, the rise of what really has been going on in this economic climate between merger and acquisition, divestitures, it comes up more and more. And then to your point, it's also the accuracy of the information of the private company, right? I've seen a lot of organizations really focus a lot on making sure that they have the right view of a private organization, the right address, the right information. How do you get to the owner of the organization, say for a deal, or wanting to even use it as a tool to say, hey, we want to start buying or investing in, say, plumbing organizations, who owns them? That's all private company information, right? To have that type of strategy. So it really has been a data set that has been popped up, particularly over the past few years, ripe for organizations looking to move into that space.
From your seat, Chris, are there some other data sets or are there some other examples that you would call out beyond my tick data?
Yeah, and it may not be directly with FactSet, but
that's okay. That's
there are two that I've noticed, but it's tangential, and it may also be part of FactSet. I just may not know the entire product suite, but the organizations are really moving into, or I've seen real assets, hard assets, so real estate in particular, but then also merged with weather and more geospatial data. That has been at least a couple times already this year. We've started having that conversation, and it's mostly to tie it back to what we were saying with the tick data. Normally you wouldn't think storing tick data in Snowflake because it's timestamps, and timestamps are very hard to read, right? But because Snowflake, the platform has evolved so much, now you have the capability of running time series analysis rather quickly in Snowflake. So when you point together time series analysis with geospatial and hard assets, like you're really you can come up with some rather interesting ways of valuing real estate or predicting where certain homes may or may not need a new roof, right? And not invest in them or not insure them from an insurance use case. You could really start doing things over time. It's really rather fantastic to see how that's evolved.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit from talking about standard data feeds to talk a little bit about private data feeds. For any of you watching this podcast who know me, you know my unofficial title at FactSet is the godfather of all things portfolio. So the fact that we got as far into this podcast without talking about portfolios has probably stunned you, but nonetheless, one of the things that we're doing with Snowflake that right now that is really resonating, especially with the buy-side clients out there, is the ability to take an analytics data feed from FactSet and bring it into Snowflake as a private data share. So what are we really talking about when we talk about an analytics data feed into Snowflake? Performance numbers, GIPS results, performance attribution, fundamental characteristics, risk characteristics, potentially ESG stats, risk return, peer quartile ranks, things like that. The entire suite of what someone can do in their portfolio analytics workflows around the portfolios and the engines in FactSet, bringing those results into Snowflake as opposed to a more traditional data warehouse to then be the analytics book of record that might be feeding a downstream portal. It might be feeding a reporting process. It could be feeding any array of different solutions. We are doing these every day, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the solution between FactSet and Snowflake. We're incredibly excited about it. Clients are jumping all over it. Chris, how are you seeing that from your seat? And maybe is anybody who's doing that other than FactSet being fired up about it?
I think that in this case, you can definitely, as the godfather of portfolios, feel very comfortable. The PA solution that the organization is known for, in my opinion, is kind of the holy grail of.
It's nice of you to say.
Yeah, and I'm not, I know I'm not getting paid to say it either. Yeah. It's having worked in the industry for quite some time. But to, with that aside, right, what you were just highlighting though is back to that value proposition. How do we make sure that it's not just surfacing the data in a GUI, but we're getting the same information into the hands of the data consumer in the way that they want to use it and manipulate it, right? And that private share via Snowflake, creating that single store, source of truth, coming out of PA. But then, as you mentioned, there's other use cases. We have to make sure that performance number is the same that goes to regulatory reports, the same goes to client reports, the same that if we are doing any transformation or any calculation, that we have the lineage and the auditability of what we had done to surface it out to, potential regulator in the future if that is required, right? Those are the pieces where when you have that analytics book of record, like you just said, sure, you'll never have a tile or a data feed on PA. That's the output of your software. But as mentioned, all of that needs to be in a centralized enterprise repository. Otherwise, you have the ability to have reputational risk if you wind up misreporting that performance number on a fact sheet, as opposed to what you actually deliver to your client. So it's great to see that organizations are starting to truly put the pieces of the puzzle together and going, wow, the more and more that we have a centralized gold layer, we can start reducing some operational frictions. So
you talk about that centralized data repository solution of Snowflake, and I think some of our listeners, some of our folks watching this are going to say, okay, I could use Snowflake for that. But I'm also hearing from State Street about the Alpha Data Platform. I'm also hearing from JP Morgan about Fusion. Those two organizations are incredibly excited about what they built with ADP and Fusion as a specialized data warehousing solution. Is that competitive with Snowflake? Or tell us what the real relationship is.
Well, this is recorded, so jokes aside. No, but it's all we power those solutions, right? So the thing ultimately is Snowflake is a platform. And while I'm an industry principal focused on wealth and asset management, in truth, we design the platform for any industry. It is a industry agnostic platform. And our goal is for organizations like the Alpha Data, State Street and JP Morgan, in this case, Alpha Data Platform and Fusion, to build on top of Snowflake with their expertise to service their clients, right? That is truly what connects the data cloud. I didn't want to go too detailed into it on the sell side earlier, but a lot of organizations that have been in the fund servicing business, and it goes well beyond just warehousing solutions. It's NAV package calculations. They do the full gambit of outsourced services. Those are partners from ours, right? And we're happy that they see Snowflake as a way that they can lever the platform, put their IP into it, and service, our mutual client base.
it's almost instead of like a tri-party relationship, it's almost more like is quad party relationship a word? It's
I think so, yeah.
the incredible subject matter experts at Snowflake. You've got the FactSet engines. You've got the client and what the client
Buy
needs.
side, yep.
But then you've got these fantastic real thought leaders, innovators at the folks at like people at JP Morgan, people at State Street, I'm sure many other organizations as well that are really coming together to do some really impressive and innovative work.
Yeah, and that's really the fun part of the role, right? I've had a fantastic 3 years. It's been actually, I think it's 3 years today, being at Snowflake, and like,
congratulations!
Thanks very much. Yeah, now that I think about it, I think it is. Sorry. And part of that is really watching how the industry has transformed over the course of 3 years. Like, it is an industry solution that has allowed the collaboration between, as you mentioned, it's probably even more than quad parties if you get to the consultants and the so on, that and oversights and the regulators and all the stakeholders. But we've kind of transformed the way that people look at information to make sure it's consistent across all those parties, right? That's the true value proposition of the AI data cloud, is that it's not just internally are we helping break down data silos, but it's across organizational and operational processes. If you are on Snowflake and these parties are all on Snowflake, well, they could see your FactSet feed. They could get in the answer, they could surface it, then they could add their color, their spin, and it's really kind of creating the highway where organizations are saying, oh, we could build various different types of cars on this. And it's super fantastic to have had that opportunity to say.
Chris, as you say transformative and innovative, it's a natural now segue into our requisite conversation about generative AI. Let's start out at a high level, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. How are Snowflake's clients using the system and using the tools and the capabilities to achieve their Gen AI ambitions at a high level?
Yeah, and to start at a really high level, what we like to say before, it's fantastic that we gotten this far even without talking about generative AI. So thank you for that bit. But here we are now, right? And the main thing that we want to remind organizations is that you really cannot have an AI strategy, right, without having a data strategy, right? And that includes, and it's all various types of data, right? The first wave of LLMs are really good at unstructured data, RAG to get out information out of documents. There's tons of other use cases. But it doesn't really matter if you don't know your business strategy, right? And then it informs your data strategy, and ultimately that will permit you to have an AI strategy. So what have we seen from Snowflake? The organizations that have that are getting the most out of generative AI have a very strong, solid data strategy and foundation. They tend to use data meshes, data products, have security and governance, and the ability to self-serve analytics, and very fantastically built data dictionaries that help them train the semantic models that really improve the accuracy of leveraging generative AI for things like information retrieval. Equity research is a great example. There's a lot of organizations trying to go right into that area of saying, as a chartered financial analyst myself, holder, it's soon enough you may not need that level of specificity all over the desk, because you may be able to fine tune an LLM to that core degree. The piece that is fantastic with Snowflake is Snowflake, as you mentioned a few times, is known for its structured data capabilities. Having the ability, the general LLMs have a fantastically hard time doing complex SQL joins. You would think it's easy, but it is not, right? They stand down. They can only really do a few table joins. But as you mentioned just earlier with your analytics book of record example, there's a lot of different views of that, and a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that need to be joined at, say, the security level, or at the organizational level, or the roll-up of both. What we've discovered at Snowflake, so we have our Cortex analyst agent, and that we've really invested heavily into it so that we could start doing really complex 20-table joins to surface out truly fantastic informations and queries, like without putting the power into the business user's hand, not into the coder's hand, to extract information about, hey, what is my exposure to Eastern Europe for supply chain for the securities that I hold in this portfolio? Right, that's a rather complicated question to ask, but we are noticing that the accuracy of retrieving that information has been quite high. So with all the observability that you get to see, hey, here's how we got to it. Here's the SQL code or the Python code that has extracted this information. So it's fantastic to see once Pandora's box is open, it's out there, seeing how organizations in various different ways tend to use generative AI to develop return on investment or productivity improvement, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Chris, you talk about the data strategy and having the data strategy as the foundation to really power what you want to build as an asset manager, as a wealth manager on the sell side. Yeah. One of the things that I want to talk about and I want to bring up is a relatively new capability, or maybe it's just a new capability from FactSet's seat, but it's the ability to integrate APIs from FactSet dynamically into that environment. One of the overarching challenges that we see from our clients is they are incredibly passionate about what they want to build, right? But the firm needs more capability than what the team that's building has either the bandwidth, the resources, or the subject matter expertise to build. So when you think about what the firm needs, there is an incredible opportunity to have a hybrid solution between the things you want to build and the things you want to license.
Yes.
And in response to that, I think Snowflake's done an amazing job of opening up API capabilities. Can you talk about that in general? And then I'll highlight a couple specific examples.
Yeah, and kind of as you mentioned, and even as we brought up with certain service providers earlier, there are different operating models, and it matters based on each of the organizations of where you can play and what your core competency is. Not everyone is going to have the technology budget of JP Morgan, right? So JP Morgan can build. Other organizations need to think about, well, how do I buy, or what is the way for me to have information? And it leads to a fantastic work that we're doing collectively together to say all of the generative AI solutions that you have put together at FactSet and now have API calls to retrieve, well, how can we get that just right into the hands of people that are leveraging Snowflake to build their own data applications, to build their own dashboards without needing to go through the legacy hops of going through various different systems. So we continue to develop our API capabilities, but the one that we collectively are working on together definitely does allow organizations that cannot have the capabilities of fine-tuning models specifically to certain data sets. Well, you can surface out the API answers of a translate or a complete or a summarize out to them based on what you have worked on.
Yeah. So let's give a real tangible example. If you're out there and you're developing Gen AI solutions for your organization and you believe part of your strength is writing portfolio commentaries for the organization, that's fantastic. We will take the reports, we'll take the analytics out of FactSet, we'll deliver those to you as an analytics data feed, bring those into Snowflake, build the commentary on performance attribution, tracking error, the whole enchilada for what you want to do. That's great. If that's not part of your subject matter expertise, if that's not part of your focus, but your strategy is centered around Snowflake, you're not stuck.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly exciting. We have the ability to take the portfolio commentary capability in FactSet or the security explanation capability in FactSet, really pieces from the FactSet solution, and use APIs to sit natively inside Snowflake and call out to FactSet and have FactSet bring back that unstructured text of the security explanation or the portfolio commentary for you to just use, for you to further refine, for you to bake into the overall mosaic of what you're trying to do. It's an incredible level of dexterity to operate on your terms. Focus where you want to focus, not focus and outsource to maybe us or someone else, another capability other than FactSet, who's giving API access to their Gen AI tools to be able to build the solution you want to build on your terms. I think that is incredibly powerful as you sort of look around the corner and try to not paint yourself sort of into a corner with your overarching Gen AI vision.
Yeah, and I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'll say it again. It's a fantastic quote, and I really need to remember who I could attribute it to, but it's back to the point of, hey, the things that used to take us days take us minutes now, right? In a decade ago, you'd have to go through, you'd have to have the analytics, wait till end of day, copy and paste best you can, extract something out of a PDF. And now we're just talking about how intelligence and information and the operating models you mentioned, hey, focus where you want to focus on your core competencies, buy and outsource where you don't. But you can accelerate processes drastically. And that is truly the productivity enhancing capabilities of generative AI. Not just on a business level, the enterprise level, a personal level, what that has been able to do, or learning how to leverage it in order to help improve and accelerate your own productivity. It's been rather eye-opening to see how some individuals are using it.
But Snowflake's ability to leverage APIs and play nicely and sort of create doorways for APIs goes well beyond the Gen AI capabilities of someone like FactSet. It also extends to more data sets. We talked about all of those 76 data sets that are part of Snowflake today as standard data feeds. That includes things like transcripts, street account news, filings. That's great. But as many of you know, third-party research can't be part of a standard data feed because of licensing reasons. That's just a non-starter. But if you have the right permissions from the right third-party research organizations, you can use those same APIs to now open that door and bring that content via the API more surgically into that same Snowflake environment where you're going to build your Gen AI capabilities. Yeah. And that is another incredibly powerful sort of ingredient into the overall recipe, or the stone soup, if you will, of what you're building as an organization.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted it inside of what you just brought up, is that the commercial models for organizations are starting to change and evolve as well, right? And it really is just the beginning of generative AI, but I think that the industry and regulators and others are going to need to have a conversation to say, how do we not miss the ball on leveraging this technology and let it use and kind of change the way that our collective financial services industry can work, right? And just as you kind of mentioned, that there's different potential models for sell-side research organizations to say, hey, I know they're not allowed to have it in certain ways, but do we really want to be in this business? Can we just be licensing IP, delivering it in certain capacities? I think as people become more comfortable with cloud technology, with the need for generative AI, and part of what this vodcast is looking to do is to kind of demystify what it is for the cloud and what it can do for you. I think that you're going to see even more change, right? And I think it's fantastic to see FactSet pioneering a different way to get that information out.
And I think just to add to that, there's so many more, when we think of sort of third-party research, right? It's not just sell-side research anymore. There's so many more organizations that have unique perspective, that have this subject matter expertise that they are making available to the bigger community of asset managers, hedge funds, to do that can be part of this same solution.
Yeah. And, to the point, as you mentioned, as an individual analyst, it used to be a challenge to aggregate all those disparate sources of data and centralize them. And that, has slowly but started to go away. And now you can run this much more algorithmically than you probably need to do in Excel's spreadsheets and modeling land. So you could be much more automated to say, hey, bring in these 5 separate research reports, come in, tell me where the breaks are. Show me where the difference of opinions. Help me explain. Go a level deeper. Explain why. Check do some deep research and see if you can validate that proof point. Like that was an entire day cycle. Like now that's 4 API calls.
Yeah.
To kind of get to that level of workflow, and that'll change how we all work.
Yeah. It's really, at the end of the day, what it's doing is it's taking the art of the possible, and it's taking the lines of what can and can't be done, and just erasing those lines and redrawing a much bigger box of what's capable and what's available to the person on the other side, the builder of the Gen AI or the architect of the Gen AI solution at the financial firm on what they can and can't do, right? And that's an incredibly exciting innovation for FactSet and for Snowflake to be able to offer.
Yeah, for sure. And what we've also seen, just to put one final point on, pointing generative AI for data management, for actual data, and the data lifecycle is a fantastic area to focus on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of improvement in sourcing and transformation and things of that nature that it truly could help in.
Yeah. Chris, anything else that you would add if we think about, if we go back to Mr. Gretzky and talk about where the puck is going? Any other thoughts you have that you think would be interesting for our audience to understand about sitting in your seat? Where's Gen AI going?
Yeah, and the one thing that I am fortunate enough to see, and Snowflake as a platform allows and has started relationships from OpenAI, Anthropic, all the way down, Hugging Face, et cetera, open source. We want to allow you to have the flexibility for the model that you want to use, because certain models are better for certain fit-for-purpose use cases. That's what we're starting to discover. But to that point of highlighting that, it means don't hard code to a specific model, because the models are just coming out with fantastic levels of improvement in accuracy in certain functions, cognitive functions. They're lowering in cost, right? So that you, as long as you have a flexible approach to how you want to design your Gen AI use cases, your applications, you will not be behind the puck, right? If you hard coded to 3.5 of OpenAI, like, you are that application is not useful, right? Or is not as useful as it can be if it was using, say, Claude. So depending upon the use case and the structure, I'm not going to get into too much detail. But to that point, that would be what I'd offer and recommend, is try to be as flexible as possible, because you never know, it's changing every day, and you need to be able to adapt and evolve with it. And that would be the last bit of advice I would add.
Chris, taking it out even a little bit wider than that was pretty wide. As you think about the future of Snowflake and you think about the future of cloud and maybe where you guys are going as an organization with your overarching vision, where some of the technology innovation is going.
Yeah.
What is give us a preview of what the future holds.
Yeah. Is there a safe harbor disclosure on this? We should put one up. But with that being said, we really have, and our recent acquisitions have really been moving us into the analytics space, as well as making it easier to bring unstructured and semi-structured information inside of Snowflake. We had a recent acquisition of Datavolo, particularly for streaming in unstructured data from various sources, so that truly, when you want to start building these generative AI solutions and you want to build more analytical solutions, you don't want to have silos between where your structured and unstructured data is. You want to just be able to ask a question, have the agents know, an agentic AI kind of workflow know where to go extract and receive that information, so that we could say, hey, based on what is going on this Twitter feed, show me my portfolio that may be exposed to the sentiment that's coming, right? It used to be very, very challengingly architected for certain hedge funds and things like that. We're trying to simplify that process. So where we're looking to go is really allow any form of data, any structure of data. We constantly try to increase the frequency, the speeds of computing that information, and just allow you to have almost an advanced analytics operating system at your fingertips, under the same way that if you do know Snowflake and are familiar with it, secure, governed, easy to use, it just works. You don't have to worry about spinning up clusters for Python or SQL or Java. Like, we'll take care of that underlying cloud infrastructure. That's truly what Snowflake does incredibly well, so that you can just go about your day as though you don't have to worry about orchestrating the underlying hyperscaler to go about your business.
Great. Chris, I just want to thank you so much for doing this with us today. I appreciate you taking the time. At FactSet, I speak for our broader team. We are incredibly appreciative of the partnership between Snowflake and FactSet. You, Matt Glickman, Kieran Kennedy, a great team that has always sort of thought about how FactSet plus Snowflake, 1 + 1 can be greater than 2 for the clients. For those of you who watch this podcast today, I hope it, more than anything else, it has reset your expectations on what you can achieve and what's possible when you partner with Snowflake or Snowflake and FactSet. But more importantly, when you think about the art of the possible, what can be achieved and what can be achieved in sort of an optimal way for your organization. And we hope you'll reach out to us or your FactSet team or your Snowflake team about how to dig into some of these ideas more. And thank you so much. Have a great day.